Today I want to talk with you about the ladder of souls. Today's story is at the root of any question you might have in life. Ironically, a lot of people, they sit with the role of questions, but their essential question is about the nature of reality. All these strange people who think that we're living in the Matrix, or that we live in hell, or that we are living in some kind of whatever kind of organizational dysfunctionality. These are strange, and we're going to talk a little bit about some of these things today. What we are going to talk about today has a little bit to do with the core of all the questions that you might be having in your life. A lot of questions that you have about the purpose of life and so on, but also about where you want to go to in your life in the future. All these things that all hang together with a few basic questions, namely, what is the nature of reality and how do we resolve the asymmetries and the problems that we come across in these kind of things. And I'm not going to say to you what is the answer. I'm not like that, but I'm going to talk to you about two different perspectives, the Christian perspective, and I'm going to talk to you about the Christian Greek perspective, and I'm going to talk to you about the Chinese perspective. These perspectives, they are contradictory to each other. They are not exactly mutually exclusive, but they're definitely throwing a wrench in the wheel of universalism. If you think about these kind of things, you talk about health things, you talk about spiritual things, you talk about political things and social things, you talk about ethnic things and religious things and so on. All these kind of subjects, they all relate more or less around the fact that nobody seems to agree with anybody else. That is not just for social groups who do not agree with other social groups, but also individuals. They don't seem to really agree with anybody else. So people have opinions. And there is some research, we can make agreements about research. That's the whole point of science, is to reach an agreement, like what do we think that it might be, and in some cases what do we decide this is probably what it is. And as a result of that, we can communicate with each other because we can build something on that idea. That idea builds your car, and the idea of your car is built on how we are agreeing upon each other. And this is also how the farm works, where they grow a lot of crops that you eat every day. And the buildings that you are building are all based on agreements that people have, and that is called science. This science is layered, and some of them is very abstruse, and some of it is very concrete. And these different kind of sciences, they might frighten you because you don't understand them, but it doesn't mean what their purpose is basically to find similarities in thoughts. Having the idea that science is something threatening out of the way, we can start talking about the things that I actually want to share with you. And I share this with you because many people, they know me, like, you know, you always say that the Chinese, they don't have a concept of soul. Does that mean then that the Chinese actually are soulless? Is this the reason why they have come up with that? But let me go with you to the root of these ideas, and we go back so something like 2,500 years, and we go talk about two famous thinkers, Aristotle and Xunzi. Because when I was reading first Aristotle in my puberty, when we were with some friends, we were really discovering Western philosophy, and later on when I was reading the City of God from the church father Augustinus, who settled these ideas about both Platonism and the thoughts of Aristotle in Christian thought. He, at that moment, this period at that time, came up with several kind of ideas, and Aristotle came up with the idea of the psyche, and the psyche became later translated in the soul. And I'm not going to go into all kinds of details about how they eventually get into that idea, because there's different ideas about that too, because the psyche, for instance, was seen as a monad by Leibniz, and there's a lot of other thinkers who have got something to say about these kind of things. But Aristotle, he talked about the psyche, and in the beginning, when he started talking about the psyche, he basically mentioned we have one psyche. But then later on he said, like, no, we have three psyche. We have a vegetative psyche, we have an animal psyche, and we have a human psyche. And these vegetative, animal, and animal psyche, these are cumulative aspects that relate to the things that we are possessing as human beings, but as a cumulative things. That means that a vegetable, a plant, a tree, only have a vegetative psyche, and an animal has a vegetative and a animist psyche. When we talk about the psyche and the role that it plays, we had by accident a similar discussion with students when we were talking about Ling, because I explained that through Ling meditation you learn to recognize what is natural and what is artificial. So Ling awareness, that is the integration of Ling as a substance of the nature of the universe, then at that moment you start seeing a differentiation between what is artificial and what is real. Like this table is artificial, even though the interior is made from wood pulp. It is no longer real. It's been chemically bleached and stuff like this, and it is as dead as can be. And artificial things are dead, like the vase is dead. The plant still has some ling, but this ling is gradually waning because it's a dying plant. So from the perspective of Ling, and then also from Taoist view, the flowers, how beautiful they are, maybe in the eye of the beholder, in fact they are beings suffering and being on the way to extinction and non-existence. As a result of that, we can say maybe not such a nice thing to put on your table, but you know, it's something. Some people appreciate that and some people just don't. That is because of the way how you can see these things, and we surround ourselves with a lot of things which have no longer Ling, like these books. Originally they were clothing, or they were wood, or maybe at some time they were wood or something like this, and they were made into paper and ink and so on. But at the moment they are soulless, so to say, in a Western perspective, but they are without Ling. And Ling is not a soul. This is something that people sometimes seem to think. But let's go back to the idea of the psyche. When we talk about the plant soul, this is the psyche, the vegetative psyche as a whole. The animal souls, like I said, is the plant soul and the animal soul, and it is also called the sensitive soul. And at the moment, when we talk about the people's soul, we talk about the plant-based soul, the animal-based soul, but also what comes with that is a rational soul. So that means that what makes people different from animals is our rationality. And at the moment, when we are looking at this rationality, that means that reasoning is what makes us human, according to that kind of thinking. But in the Christian perspective, we can say that this constellation of the animal, vegetable, and human soul, the rational soul, we can call the three treasures, because we have these three different kinds of souls. Because we have this layered nature, our soul actually becomes something meaningful. So the idea that you have only one soul is a typical Christian one, because in the Christian perspective, this soul is being flushed into us from the pleroma of God. And this pleroma of God is the substance of God, which through the legs of the Kabbalah, being flushed out into the human flesh. And that makes us part of God. This is the idea of Christianity and the soul. So the soul is what is our Godhead. And the concept of energy that people very often use is based on the force of God, the life force that God then gives to the human body, which makes us different from animals, makes us different from plants. And this specific, special kind of soul, in that sense, is through which we also go through identity crisis. Because the idea of Christianity is that because we have a soul, anybody who isn't with God doesn't have a soul. And it means that if you choose to go against God, you are belonging to the demons and the hell beings. And as a result of that, you turn yourself from God, and at the end of the world, then you cannot find salvation. So this is basically the Christian idea about the psyche. Aristotle didn't have any idea like that. For him, was just the soul, or the psyche, was just the fact that what makes us different from animals. When we go look at the Chinese culture, we primarily can start talking about Xunzi. Xunzi was like Menzi and Confucius. He was a Confucian, of course, and he had a lot of different kind of ideas. But Xunzi also had this idea about human nature, and he said that people, they have different kind of substances also, and not like the Jing, Qing and Shen that we talk about in Taoism and in Tai Chi Chuan, for instance, or Chinese medicine. Xunzi said that fire has qi, but the qi has no life, the fire has no life. And as a result of the fire not having life, the fire is a power, but it is limited in its capacity. Then what comes on top of the fire, and this is something that is very often wrongly understood, because very often we see that our herbs and stuff like this are rooted in wood, and that life is rooted in wood. But you can see that in this thinking, that's what actually motivates us is fire, and not necessarily wood. Wood is just a vehicle in that sense, something that has to be burned, or that has to be burned to produce fire anyway, as a fuel. But then he says the plants and the trees, they know life, they have qi, yes, so that means that they have two parts. But the third part is that they don't have any perception or understanding, and this is a zhi from Dao, and Dao, of course, is what Taoism and Lao Tzu and so on all the time talk about. And this is about what do we know, yes, and how do we understand things, and how is our understanding related to our perception. So you can see how these thoughts, of course, are intertwined with each other. Birds and animals, though, he said, they have qi, they have life, they have perception and understanding to a degree, but they do not have a sense of justice or morality. This is called yi. And because they don't have a yi, then at that moment they are still limited in their being. Of course, we know animals can feel guilt, but they have guilt after they've done something. They don't have it before they do something. So this is what is important, where human beings separate themselves from the animals, because we have a sense of morality that we are trained with, and that roots our actions. So you can see where I'm going at with this story, of course, because that means that people, they have qi because they have fire, and this fire has qi, and this is the ancient character of qi. That's not the character of qi that people nowadays use in TCM. That's another character. Taoists still talk about that qi. And you see here the one, and here you see the other one, and you see the difference. And as a result of that, you see that this qi is based on a character for void or emptiness or negation, and that actually creates the fire. So you see that the qi itself is already something very complicated. Then at that moment, when you look further, you see the plants, you see that they have all the other things. But we, as people, we have the qi life, we have the perception, and we have the sense of morality, the sense of justice. And as a result of that, we can understand when we do particular kind of things, things go wrong. As a result of that, in Chinese culture, they very long had this idea that to be human, and they still have that idea to a large degree, to be human, you have to prove your civilization. Because at the moment when you prove the fact that you are civil, that you have a moral understanding, you know that the only thing that is really very important is that these aspects of qi, life, understanding, and morality, that these four things are all of prime importance. And this is something that needs to be cultivated within our human beings. Our morality has to be cultivated to make us fully human. That means that we are borderline animalistic. We are borderline human. So at the moment when we are born, we don't have that. And it means that the moral nature is something that needs to be trained. That is very different from the Christian perspective or the Aristotelian perspective, because the psyche and the soul, they are inborn to human beings. And in the Xunzi's thought, this is something that is not just inborn, but it is something that we can cultivate, and then it is part of us, and then it also drives us. And part of that morality is the integration with what we earlier said, the Ling, which is something that is not exactly from us, but there is Ling from heaven, and there is a Ling from the earth. No, there is the Ling as part of the Hum, and this is part of heaven, and there is the Po, which is the more animalistic aspects of us. So you see that these parts are also there, and these are as being part and representative of earth and as representative of heaven. They are part of who we are, and as a result of that, we can say that they also motivate us, but they are not part of us necessarily. So what we do with the Ling is we integrate our behavior and our awareness and our consciousness with this Ling, and as a result of that, we can return and we can turn our consciousness into what is called the Yuanshen, and as a result of this, the Lingshen and the Yuanshen, they become like one, and as a result of this, we become more than just human beings. We can become aware of all kinds of other things that are really mattering to persist in having qi, persist in having life, and persist in having understanding, and persist in the development of morality. And that is then what helps us escape the limitedness of life from the perspective of, well, how animals would see that. But then we go to the Ming Dynasty, and this is especially for people who do Wudang Kung Fu, of course, very important, and people who are related to this kind of schools and they really want to study this. You have to understand that Tai Chi Chuan and also Taoist medicine, Chinese medicine, they exist in the context of these things, and this has to be, of course, public knowledge, otherwise it doesn't really work for anybody. So let's go a little bit deeper into that, because in the Ming Dynasty we talk about well, what we now would call a biologist, who was called Wang. And Wang, he was observing nature. It's something that the Taoists very often do, but he made particular kind of observations based on the philosophy of Sun Tzu, and he went a few steps further with it. And he says, not fire has qi, but heaven has qi. It's the same character as we mentioned before, and this qi has ghost-like qualities. That means that it is around, but it doesn't really manifest itself, so it has no form. And it also doesn't have any clarity or sensitivity, which is called Qing. Qing and Xing both are very often associated also with sexuality and with, even with the genders of people. The same qualities of qi we can also find in things that relate to heaven, like for instance rain, snow, frost, dew, and so forth. So these are all things that relate to that. That is also why Taoists, they like to go early out in the morning, catch the dew in the moon mirror, and then drink the dew, because that actually provides them with the qi. So this is what they want. This is what they do, and this is why they do it. So we know all the stories, if you look into Taoist literature, that people do this, but why they do it, yeah, this is because the qi is in the dew, and this is where the idea comes from. So we can also see as a result of that, that the earth, the Di, it has form, and other things that have form also, they have Xing. They have a Xing, but they don't have a Qing. And that means that they are still different from other things. So they're not the same like heaven. Heaven has a qi, but earth things have a form. And this is what the earth does. So in the creation process, heaven goes into a marriage with earth. And then as a result of that, things become first shaped, that is the fork that comes up from the earth, and then eventually it has a form in the form of trees and animals and insects and human beings. But it has no Qing, so the sensuality part, the clarity part, is actually missing. That means that earth things are by nature turbid. That is also why yin is described in the classics as contracting, and the yang is seen as expanding, because that actually creates clarity. And it means that if something has form, it is actually turbid, and at the moment when it has Qing, it is actually clear. And this is what we are looking for. We're looking for the integration of Qing and Jing, Xing and Jing in Taoist alchemy. And when people translate Xing as one's nature, then they mean one's yin nature. That means that the turbidity of being human, this is actually what is meant. And at the moment when we talk about the Qing, we talk about somebody's clarity. That's the yang nature of a person. And this is where these things, they come together. So things like herbs, woods, minerals and so on, all these kind of things, they are part of this category of earth. And this is basically the root of herbal and food medicine. This is also why herbal and food medicine is always seen as inferior to acupuncture, massage and ritual. Because at the moment when you feed somebody with turbidity, you work on somebody on its physical aspects, but you do not work on somebody's humane aspects. This is also why you can't restore Jing with herbs. You can only stimulate somebody to do something, and then they have to exercise to start building up the Jing, because the Jing is dependent on the Shun. Because without awareness and without consciousness, the Jing cannot be directed to help you shape your body and then eventually settle itself in the form of your body, which is the Xing. And we talk about two different things here, mind you, we come back to that in a moment. And at the moment when we have these kind of things, when heaven and earth have intercourse, they produce the Xing shape. This is on this side. And at the moment when we have this Xing shape, they give rise to the Xing shape is the beginning, the fork, basically, that becomes concrete, and that eventually becomes the form in the sense of Xing form, when we talk about somebody's nature. When people talk about that as being somebody's nature, but also and at that moment we develop Qing, so we develop clarity and sensitivity, and as a result of that we become something more. Birds, animals, insects, fishes and so on, they all have this. So things which have this shape, they originate in the shape from the earth, and because of the interbreeding with heaven, they get the first shape, then they get form, and then develop feathers and scales and hairs. And this is then, of course, the next stage in there. And at the moment when we go one level further, you can say that in this same thing from these animals, there are secretions, and their excretions, they all have qi, because they are all parts of heaven. That means that if you eat an animal's poop, like the fertilizer you use to grow plants, this is because the bird's poop has a qi inside, and this is what makes it grow. This qi is not good for us, and this is something that the Taoist Daoland remarked. It said all the herbs are classified into 3 levels. Herbs for the sick, because they're poisonous, but the benefits are bigger than the losses, because a person is already so sick that it doesn't really matter that much. And most of the herbs that we use in medicine, they are for that category. And then the mid-level is the near healthy, and the near healthy is what we call sub-healthy nowadays, and this is 90% of all humanity probably, the ones that are not sick. Although in modern times you can ask yourself how many people are still sub-healthy, but they can function, they can do things, they can thrive, they can build society, they can have children and so on. Everything is fine. But then there's also a percentage of herbs. There's a group of herbs which is called for the really healthy, or the immortals, the xians. And these herbs, they are poisons for everybody except for the xians. So that means that they are the only ones who can eat that, because they can digest them, and the other ones, they cannot digest them. So you can see that there's a differentiation in these kind of things. And herbal medicine in that sense is, as a base level thing, it requires also a proper dispersion in the different categories. So having an understanding of these categories, you know what these things can do, you can classify things and you can see this is the nature of what they can be used for. This is the foundation of medicine. And at the moment we go to the next, you can see that of course the human beings, they also have of course this morality aspect. And this morality aspect is what you train through your Qigong, this is what you train through your Tai Chi Chuan, your martial arts, that what you train in your respect for your parents and your peers and the ones who are below you in the social ladder. And this is the most difficult part, because being human is something that has never changed from Chinese culture. Namely, being human is something that you have to prove by the means of cultivation. And this is what eventually will make you an immortal, because only when you're a full human being, you're developed in the most moral way, then at that moment you also know how not to harm other beings. You do know how not to harm yourself, and you do know how to support everything else, as the Wu Xing and Yin Yang theory suggest. So this is basically it. That also means, of course, that you now have a clear understanding that there is no concept of soul in Chinese culture. Yes, in modern China, you can say, oh, but my friends, my Chinese friends, they all talk about having a soul, blah, 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 blah. That is because exotic esoterics are usually fashionable. That means we also started studying Taoism and so on because it's exotic, because we think we understand Western spirituality, which we don't, and then as a result of that, we look for answers in something else. And as a result of that, we are finding things or we don't find things. But in modern China, now the concept of soul, because of the influence of Christianity, has become so widespread. Christianity and Islam are the biggest religions in China at the moment. And then at that moment, you can say that people find it very attractive to think in these kind of concepts, even though they might not have the same kind of understanding of the soul as we have, because they have their cultural views too. So that's very interesting. If you know more about it, or if you want to know more about it, or if you have your own thoughts about it, just leave them in the comments and say something about it. Share that with people so that we can keep this discussion alive. And as a result of that, we can gradually together benefit from all the information that we gather through all the reactions. Talks are great. So thank you very much, everybody. I look forward to see you in our next movie, and I hope this was very interesting for you. And I am sure eventually in the back of your head, something will click through which you recognize, like, I have to share this with my friends. So if you share this with your friends, that will be really great, because it's important.